What if, for a single second, reality simply switched off and only you noticed? Think about it calmly. Not as a distant idea, but as something that may have already happened to you. Maybe today, maybe yesterday, maybe even now as you watch this. That strange feeling that something jumped, as if a piece of time had been erased, a microglitch, an invisible cut in your own existence. Have you ever experienced this? You know when you're doing something simple using your phone, walking around the house, looking out the window, and suddenly everything seems to freeze up a little. It's not obvious. It's not like a glaring error. It's subtle, silent, almost imperceptible. But, for some reason, you feel it. As if reality had choked for a moment and then continued normally, pretending nothing happened. Now tell me, what if this wasn't just a feeling? What if there was, in fact, a flaw in reality? Imagine reality as a system. Something structured, organized, running perfectly. Until, at some point, something goes wrong. A bug, an error in the code. A glitch that shouldn't be there. And for a brief moment, everything stops. Or worse, everything continues, but with small distortions that almost no one can perceive. Except you. Perhaps you've already noticed strange things. Small details out of place. That feeling of déjà vu that comes on too strong, as if you were reliving something exactly the same. Or when someone repeats the same phrase, in the same tone, in the same context, and it gives you a shiver that you can't explain. Stay with me until the end. Because what you're about to discover might surprise you. There's a pattern to these events. They don't happen randomly. They follow a strange logic, almost like small cracks in something much larger. As if reality weren't as stable as we believe. As if, behind it all, there's a system trying to keep functioning, even with glitches happening all the time. And the most unsettling thing isn't the glitch itself. The fact is that, most of the time, nobody notices. People continue acting normally, talking, walking, living, as if nothing had happened. As if that small mistake had never existed. And this raises an uncomfortable question. Is the problem in reality, or in the way we perceive it? Because if you've started noticing these details, it could mean one thing. You're not seeing reality the same way everyone else is. And perhaps this is not an accident. Perhaps this is the beginning of something. So, before we continue, pay attention to what you're feeling right now, to the environment around you, to the sounds, to the movements, because from here on out, we're going to start looking at these glitches in a completely different way, as if each little flaw were a clue, trying to show you something that's always been there, hidden right in your mind. Nte. That's exactly why this kind of thing is almost never discussed in depth, because the moment you start paying real attention, something changes. Not out there, but in here. The way you interpret time, patterns, small details, everything starts to take on a different weight. And I want to propose something to you while you continue watching this. If at any point in your life you've ever felt this kind of glitch, this microglitch, this intense déjà vu, this strange feeling that something is out of place for a second, share it here in the comments. Even if it seems silly, even if you've never told anyone about it. Because, even though it may seem like an isolated incident, you might be surprised by how many people have experienced something similar. And that changes everything. Your participation here is not just any comment. It's as if each account is a piece of a larger puzzle, something that, on its own, doesn't make much sense, but together with other experiences, it begins to reveal a pattern. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you the most so far, or even what has made you uncomfortable. Sometimes, it's precisely what we avoid facing that reveals the most about what's happening. And if you're enjoying this kind of content, these topics that play with perception, with the mind, with that fine line between what's real and what seems real, click like. It may seem simple, but this shows that this type of subject needs to continue being explored, that it's worth going deeper. And if you want to continue on this journey, understanding more about these paradoxes, these errors in reality, these sensations that almost no one can explain, subscribe to the channel, because, ultimately, this space isn't just about videos, it's about people who started to understand things, and decided not to ignore them anymore. And the more people who join, the stronger this conversation becomes. Now, with that in mind, there's a specific detail about these flaws that almost nobody notices. And that's exactly where things start to get even stranger. Now Andy want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because when you start observing these small flaws more closely, you realize that they aren't just random events, they seem to carry a kind of hidden pattern. Almost as if they were signs left behind the scenes of reality itself. And this is where everything starts to change. Because it's no longer just a strange moment or a passing feeling. If you really stop to analyze it, these experiences have a direct impact on how you see the world, on your decisions, on your mindset. It's as if, little by little, you're being pulled into a new layer of perception, a layer where things aren't as fixed as they seem. And perhaps there is a hidden truth behind all of this, something that isn't shown, isn't explained, but reveals itself in small fragments. In those glitches, those invisible cuts, those sensations that arise from nowhere and disappear before you can fully understand them, as if reality were, in some way, trying to adjust or correct something. But what needs fixing? This is the part that almost no one questions, because while most people continue living on autopilot, without noticing these details, some begin to notice patterns. They begin to feel that there is something beyond the surface. And this isn't about fire, it's about transformation, about realizing that perhaps reality isn't a fixed scenario, but rather something in constant reconstruction, a kind of real-time system. And if that's true, then every little mistake, every strange repetition, every feeling that something doesn't fit, could be more than a coincidence. It could be a clue, a subtle revelation that something is happening behind the scenes, something that directly influences your journey, your choices, and even how you interpret what is real. And the more you realize it, the harder it becomes to ignore, because you can't go back to seeing things the same way once you start noticing the flaws. Comment below, does this make sense to me? Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the first sign almost always goes unnoticed. It doesn't arrive as something frightening or obvious. On the contrary, it appears in a common, familiar, almost comfortable way. And that's exactly why nobody pays attention. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and feel like you've experienced it before, exactly the same way. It's not just a vague memory, it's a complete sensation. The atmosphere, the words, the movement of the people, everything seems to follow a script you already know, even without knowing where from. This is the point that many people simply ignore. Call it coincidence, call it tiredness, call it distraction. But what if this is the first encounter with something bigger? Because déjà vu, for example, might not just be a memory glitch. It could be an overlap, as if two versions of the same moment were crossing paths for an instant. A small misalignment in time, a glitch so quick that your mind tries to fix it before you even realize the real impact. And it goes even further. Sometimes you forget what you were going to do seconds after deciding, or when you pick up your phone and simply can't remember why. It seems trivial, but if you look more closely, these gaps have a pattern. They happen at specific moments, as if something had been interrupted and restarted, like a system trying to adjust. And the most curious thing is that, in those moments, there's always a strange feeling behind them. A slight disconnection, an inner silence that lasts less than a second, but that leaves a mark. This affects your mindset without you even realizing it, because little by little, you begin to question your own decisions, your perception, your memory. And this generates a silent but profound impact. As if you were beginning to see small cracks in something that always seems solid. What if these signs aren't random glitches, but rather fragments of a hidden truth trying to emerge? Something that happens behind the scenes, far from common perception, but which, for some reason, begins to reveal itself precisely to those who are more attentive, more present, more willing to question. And perhaps the most important thing here is not what is happening, but the fact that you've started to notice. Write this down. I'm noticing Telso Open. I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after you start noticing these first signs, something changes in the pattern. It's no longer just an internal feeling or an isolated déjà vu. The strangeness begins to take shape in the world around you, and this is where many people feel it, but prefer not to think about it. Small repetitions begin to appear, not identical enough to be obvious, but similar enough to be unsettling. A person passing through the same place twice, at the same pace. A conversation that seems to follow the exact same flow as something you've already experienced minutes before, as if reality were reusing parts of itself, as if it were saving processing power. And the more you observe, the more these details begin to emerge. Objects you were sure of knowing where they were appear in another place, not in an absurd way, but subtly, enough to make you doubt yourself before questioning anything else. That's the critical point. Because your mind tries to maintain stability, it prefers to believe it was distraction, tiredness, a memory lapse. But, deep down, there's that feeling, that silent discomfort that won't go away, as if something is out of sync. And perhaps it is, because if this is a system, it doesn't fail cleanly. It fails in layers, first in time, then in perception, and then in the behavior of things around it, like a sequence of micro-errors that accumulate until they create a larger distortion. And what's most unsettling is that these distortions don't seem random. They follow you. They appear in moments when you are most present, most attentive, as if there were a direct link between your consciousness and these flaws, as if perceiving them would, in some way, activate these events even more. This completely changes your journey, because it's no longer about what's happening out there. It's about the impact it has on your way of being, on your mindset, on how you start making decisions, questioning patterns, observing what previously went unnoticed. And perhaps these failures are not just mistakes. Perhaps these are revelations in disguise. Fragments of something larger trying to break through the surface, appearing in the shadows of reality, where almost no one looks. And the more you allow yourself to see, the harder it becomes to ignore that something is happening beyond what seems normal. And if this has already started for you, then it probably won't stop here. Comment below. This is weird, man. For now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when you put all these signs together, the lapses, the repetitions, the small distortions, a possibility begins to emerge that completely changes the way you see all of this. What if reality isn't exactly what you've always believed? Think about it. Everything around us follows patterns, rhythms, rules, as if there were an invisible structure organizing every detail, from the movement of time to the simplest daily decisions. Doesn't that sound familiar? That's exactly how systems work. Programs, simulations, environments that need to maintain stability, even when something goes wrong behind the scenes. And every system fails, not in a chaotic way, but in a controlled manner. Small errors that arise are corrected, adjusted, almost as if they never existed. But sometimes, these errors slip through. They appear for fractions of a second, and that's precisely where those glitches you've started to notice come in. Perhaps what you are seeing is not a random error. Perhaps it's an update in progress. Or worse, an attempt at correction. This changes the impact of everything, because if something is being adjusted, it means there's a right version, and a version that deviates from the standard, and that leads to a deeper question. Are those moments when you perceive the flaw actually moments when you deviate from the standard? As if his consciousness were, for some reason, accessing what was happening behind the scenes. And this isn't about technology, it's about perception, about mindset, about how you position yourself within this invisible structure. Because the more you question, the more you begin to see beyond the obvious, the closer you get to a possible hidden truth that has always been there, but has never truly been observed. And perhaps these flaws are not defects. Perhaps these are openings, small moments where reality lets slip something that would normally remain hidden. Subtle revelations that only appear to those willing to look more closely, to step out of autopilot, to perceive what happens behind the scenes of their own existence. If this is true, then each glitch could carry a message, not something explicit, but something that influences your decisions, your journey, and even the way you begin to interpret what is happening around you. And the more you allow yourself to consider that possibility, the harder it becomes to go back. Write this down. There's something behind this. So now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we start looking at real accounts, all of this stops seeming like just theory and begins to take on a different weight. These aren't just loose ideas or personal interpretations. There are patterns that appear in different people, in completely different contexts, but with strangely similar details. Some people describe entire days that seem to have been cut off, as if important moments simply no longer exist in their memory, but with a clear feeling that something happened there. Others recount situations in which they experienced exactly the same sequence of events. Not similar, not like anything before, exactly the same, like a perfect loop that repeated itself without warning. And the most curious thing is that these experiences are not accompanied by chaos. They come as normal, as if the system had made an adjustment and moved on. There are also reports of decisions that seem to have been switched. People who were certain of one choice, but somehow ended up on a different path and only later realized that something doesn't fit, as if a different version of that decision had been applied behind the scenes, completely altering the course of the situation. This has a profound impact on how you view your own journey, because it stops being just about what you choose, and starts being about what is allowed to continue, about which paths are maintained, and which are silently corrected. And this raises an uncomfortable question. To what extent are your decisions truly your own? Or rather, to what extent do they remain as you decided? These stories don't get prominent coverage. They don't make headlines. They aren't openly discussed. They remain scattered, fragmented, like small pieces of something larger that hasn't yet been fully revealed. But when you put it all together, an invisible thread begins to emerge, connecting each experience, as if there were some logic operating behind it. Something that interferes, adjusts, reorganizes, without ever fully revealing itself. And perhaps this evidence isn't here to prove anything directly, but to provoke a transformation in the way you observe. To take you out of autopilot and put you in a state of deeper attention, where every detail can carry more meaning than it seems. And the more you connect these dots, the harder it becomes to ignore that something is happening beyond what is visible. Comment below. I've seen something like this before. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the true effect of these flaws isn't just in what happens around you, but in what begins to happen inside you after you realize them. At first, it seems mild, just a passing doubt, a quick question that disappears and you go about your day normally. But, little by little, it starts to accumulate. Small uncertainties that silently shape your mindset. You begin to pay more attention, to analyze more, to distrust things that previously seemed obvious. And this creates an impact that many people don't immediately realize. Because when your perception changes, your decisions change too. You start to hesitate more in some choices, not out of fear, but because you feel that perhaps there is something beyond what is visible. As if each action carried a different weight, as if each path could be adjusted or redirected without you fully realizing it. And this can create a strange feeling of disconnection, not with the world, but with the idea of control. It's as if, on some level, you're no longer fully in control of your own journey. And that doesn't have to be a negative thing, but it's definitely transformative. Because it forces you to get out of autopilot. It compels you to question, to observe, to try to understand what's really behind things. But there's a delicate point in all of this. The more you notice it, the harder it becomes to ignore, and the harder it becomes to ignore. The more your mind tries to find explanations, to create meaning, to fill in the gaps with logic. But what if not everything can be explained directly? What if some of these experiences exist precisely outside the reach of common understanding? This affects how you feel, how you interpret time, how you react to the unexpected. It can generate anxiety at times. But it can also open up space for a new kind of awareness, a broader, more attentive perception, more connected to those details that go unnoticed by most. And perhaps that is the real turning point. Not the glitch itself, but what it awakens in you. Because once you start seeing these flaws as more than just coincidences, your way of living, thinking, and making decisions will never be the same again. Write this down. My mind changed at now. I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because there is a possibility that completely changes everything we've explored so far. What if it's not reality that's failing? What if the error isn't in the system, but in the way you started to perceive it? Think about it for a second. So far, everything seems to point to something external. Glitches, failures, repetitions, adjustments behind the scenes. As if there were a structure operating and, from time to time, presenting errors. But what if, in fact, these errors have always been there, and what changed was you, your perception, your conscience, his ability to notice what previously went completely unnoticed. This changes the game in a profound way, because maybe those glitches aren't happening anymore. Maybe you've only started noticing them now, as if there were a filter, a kind of invisible layer that keeps everything normal. And for some reason, that filter has started to weaken for you, and when that happens, there's no going back. You start to see patterns where before you saw chance. You begin to question decisions that once seemed natural. You start to feel that there is a deeper logic guiding everything. Even if you can't fully explain it yet, and here's where a delicate point arises. Because if the problem isn't in reality, then it means that access has changed within you. It's as if, somehow, you've stepped out of autopilot and started seeing what's behind the scenes, not as someone in control, but as someone observing beyond the surface. And that could explain a lot. Why do some people never notice anything, while others live intense experiences? Why do certain moments seem full of meaning, while others pass by unnoticed, as if there were a direct connection between your level of attention and how much reality reveals itself? This isn't just about glitches, it's about revelations. On transformation, it's about the moment when you begin to understand that maybe the world hasn't changed, but the way you interact with it has, and that has a huge impact on your journey, your choices, and how you begin to interpret what is real and what only seems to be. And if this is the real turning point, then the question ceases to be, what is happening? And becomes, why are you able to see this now? Comment below. I started to realize it. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because when you accept this possibility, that it's not reality that's failing, but your perception that's changing, a consequence arises that almost no one is prepared to face. Because understanding comes at a price. At first, it seems like just curiosity, an expansion of consciousness, a new way of seeing patterns, decisions, and signs that previously went unnoticed. But, over time, it begins to intensify. It's no longer something you control. It's something that happens, and the more you see, the harder it becomes to unsee. That feeling of strangeness ceases to be occasional and begins to be part of your daily life. Simple situations carry a different weight. Conversations seem to follow predictable scripts. Moments that should be random begin to seem calculated. It's as if everything is happening within a logic that you don't yet fully understand, but you can already feel it. And this can generate a kind of deep discomfort, because it directly affects your mindset, your sense of control, the security of believing that everything is stable and continuous. Suddenly, reality ceases to be a fixed place, and becomes something dynamic, changeable, and, at certain moments, unstable. And here is the most unsettling point. If you become aware of these flaws even more, then it means that the more conscious you become, the more exposed you are to these distortions. As if there were a direct relationship between consciousness and instability. This completely transforms your journey, because it's no longer just about understanding what's happening. It's about dealing with the impact it has on your daily life, on your choices, on how you react to the world, on how you begin to question everything around you, including yourself. And perhaps there is a limit, a point where seeing too much ceases to be merely an advantage and begins to become a risk. Not a physical one, but a perceptual one. As if the line between what is real and what seems real begins to dissolve little by little. And if this is happening now, then the question is no longer is this real, but rather, how far do you want to see? Comment below. I want to understand more now. I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because when you reach this point, where understanding is no longer a choice, everything begins to take on a new layer of meaning. It's no longer about finding clear answers, it's about dealing with questions that seem endless. And perhaps that's exactly the point, because the more you try to understand these flaws, the more they seem to escape any logical explanation, as if the very attempt to understand were already part of the process. As if reality were always one step ahead. Adjusting, reorganizing, keeping everything in balance while you try to decipher what's happening behind the scenes. And that creates a kind of loop, a cycle where you realize, question, try to understand, and realize again, but in a deeper way. Each time with more details, more nuances, more doubts. Like a journey that doesn't exactly have a final destination, but that keeps pulling you deeper and deeper inside. And perhaps the hidden truth isn't something you simply discover, but it's something you come to experience. Because after all that, reality never seems completely normal again. There's always that feeling that something could happen at any moment. A small glitch, a repetition, a detail out of place. And when that happens, you no longer react the same way, you observe. You can feel it, you connect. And that changes everything. Because now it's no longer about proving whether these flaws are real or not. It's about the impact they have on how you see the world, on your mindset, on your decisions, on how you conduct your own journey within this structure that, little by little, reveals its imperfections. And perhaps the most intriguing thing of all is that, while you're here, thinking about these possibilities, there's a chance that something has already happened. A small adjustment, a detail that went unnoticed, or even a moment that was rewritten without you noticing. And if that's true, then this conversation might not be the first time you're having it. Comment below. I've already thought about this before. Is ET perhaps amidst all of this? The most important thing isn't finding a definitive answer, but realizing that you've made it this far, that you've explored this idea, questioned it, felt it, connected the dots, and somehow, something made sense to you. If this journey has changed your perspective, it's worth continuing to explore. Subscribe to the channel, not as an automatic click, but as a conscious choice to continue investigating these themes, these flaws, these potential revelations that almost no one stops to observe calmly. And if you've stayed this far, leave a simple comment. Right, I'm with you until the end. This shows that you not only watched, but truly got into this experience. And the like here ends up being almost natural, as a sign that this conversation made sense, that this type of content deserves to continue existing and evolving. Now, there's a video over here that complements all of this in a way that might further change how you see this idea. Click on it, and continue reading there.